After serving 2 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, Jacob Green returned to his hometown in the south of Wisconsin. Jacob could have stayed in the military longer if it hadn't been for his beautiful fiancée, Maggie, waiting for him at home, and his mom, who missed her son terribly. When Jacob strolled into his hometown, striking everyone with his new uniform that was perfectly fitted to his figure, he was in for a nasty surprise. Jacob's mom was the first person to tell him, struggling to find the right words and looking all guilty. "Jacob, please don't worry, but I have some very unpleasant news for you." Having mustered up her courage, Rebecca Green finally said, "What are you talking about? What happened? Are you sick?" Jacob asked. "No, I'm fine. It's not about me. The thing is, your fiancée, Maggie, she's been living with Mr. Ramirez's son. You know, the one who owns all the farms in the area," said Rebecca in a worried voice. "How is that even possible? She promised that she would wait for me. We swore our eternal love to each other," exclaimed Jacob, slamming his fist on the table. Needless to say, this news came as a heavy blow to Jacob. The truth was that he had stopped receiving letters from Maggie long before his army contract ended. Jacob was very worried, unable to understand what could have caused such changes in Maggie's behavior. But now, when he learned that his beloved fiancé was living with Alfred Ramirez, everything became crystal clear. At first, Jacob intended to go to the farm and confront the participants of this love triangle. However, he quickly calmed down and decided that his unfaithful fiancée wasn't worth ruining his life over. Of course, Jacob's mother did everything she could to talk her son out of it to ensure that he didn't make any influential enemies. Mr. Ramirez and his son had a reputation of hot-tempered and dangerous people, and it was best to avoid them. I guess there's no need to say how hard it was for Jacob to get over his fiancée's betrayal. At one point, he even thought that his life was over, and there was no light at the end of the tunnel. But as we all know, time really does heal wounds, and eventually Jacob decided to give his life a new go. The first thing he did was get a job as a driver on one of Mr. Ramirez's farms. It goes without saying that Jacob cringed every time he saw Mr. Ramirez's arrogant son swaggering around the farm. However, Jacob knew that he needed to stay calm and focused and take care of his mom, who raised him on her own. Jacob remembered well how they were nearly starving, and Mrs. Green had to work 16-hour shifts as a milkmaid at the Ramirez family farm. Jacob never knew his father, but the rumor around the town was that Rebecca Green got pregnant by some visiting biker. Jacob didn't know if it was true, nor did he want to know. Jacob loved his mother very much, and he had accepted the fact that he didn't have a father a long time ago. During his school years, Jacob often got in trouble with his classmates who teased him about his old patched-up clothes that were too big for him. Mrs. Green worked every day until she was completely exhausted, trying to provide for her son, but the money she made wasn't enough to afford new clothes for Jacob. Jacob understood the situation and tried to help his mother any way he could, working as a shepherd from an early age. Unfortunately, it was a seasonal job and didn't pay much. But Jacob didn't care about it, as he was happy to take on whatever little jobs he could during his school years. This was also the reason why Jacob also decided to join the army after he finished high school. Unfortunately, Mrs. Green took their separation very hard and always asked her son to come home in her occasional letters. Now, Jacob was about to start working on Mr. Ramirez's farm once again, even though Mr. Ramirez was very reluctant to hire him. Because Jacob had learned to drive well in the military, he decided to choose the same occupation in his civilian life. "Be careful, Jacob. If you wreck my truck, you'll pay for it. And I don't have another car for you anyway, so get used to driving this old thing," said the rich farmer, frowning. Mr. Ramirez was already regretting having hired Jacob. The farmer knew that sooner or later, a conflict between his son and Jacob would ensue. There was deep-rooted animosity and jealousy between them, which went all the way back to their school years. "Oh well, let him suffer with this rusty wreck of a car first, and then we'll see," thought the farmer, proud of his ingenuity. In fact, Mr. Ramirez had several brand new trucks in his hangar, but he intentionally made Jacob drive this rusty wreck to spite the milkmaid's son yet again. However, what the farmer didn't know was that Jacob was a rather capable mechanic, and thus, much to Mr. Ramirez's surprise, Jacob repaired the old truck in no time, breathing second life into its engine. At the same time, Jacob worked very hard trying to ignore Mr. Ramirez's son and his contemptuous glances. But no matter how hard Jacob tried to stay away from Alfred, Mr. Ramirez's arrogant offspring came up to him on his own one day. "Are you hiding from me, Jacob? Why are you turning your face away? Are you upset because of Maggie? You shouldn't be." To give her credit, she did try to fight me off as best she could. She even screamed at the top of her lungs, said Alfred, smiling acidly. "What did you say?" Jacob asked, clenching his fists. "What, do you have trouble hearing?" answered the farmer's son with a mocking smile on his lips. That's when Jacob's fists wiped that smile off Alfred's face, knocking out a couple of his teeth along the way. The former Marine beat up his offender, despite the fact that he was the son of Jacob's employer. Fortunately for Jacob, the farm workers stopped the fight before he had any time to really hurt Alfred. However, from that moment on, the fate of the milkmaid's son was sealed. But to everyone's surprise, Mr. Ramirez didn't fire the truck driver. Moreover, he didn't even rebuke him. Of course, the farm workers were unaware of the revenge plan that the cunning farmer had come up with. For starters, Mr. Ramirez accused Jacob of stealing fuel, oil, and lubricants from the farm's hangar. "But Mr. Ramirez, I haven't been in the hangar for ages, as I leave the truck in the front yard at night. You know that. There's no way I could have stolen from you." Jacob tried to defend himself. "I don't care where you leave your truck. You obviously have been stealing from me. I'm going to have to call the police. Besides, you do have the hangar key," said the unperturbed farmer. Jacob was taken to the police station that very night, and shortly thereafter, he was transferred to a state county prison. The unfortunate man couldn't have known that he was the victim of a plot hatched by Mr. Ramirez and corrupt cops from the small, inconspicuous town in the state's south. Charles Ramirez spent years intentionally bribing corrupt state officials to make sure they'd help him out if he ever needed it. Rebecca Green did her best to help out her son, but there wasn't much she could do, since police refused her son's bail. When Jacob walked along the dimly lit prison hallway, he couldn't have known that there were prisoners who were warned of his arrival and were expecting Jacob in his cell. In fact, Charles Ramirez bribed the prison administration to make sure that the rest of Jacob's life would turn into a living hell. When Jacob heard the cell doors close behind him, he already knew what was going to happen. He shaped up and took a fighting stance as he saw the criminals circle around him. The inmates didn't expect that and thus pulled back. Then, one of the prisoners, who was clearly the leader, said, "Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you, and how did you end up in here? Don't worry, no one's going to touch you unless I tell them to." "I'm not afraid. If you want to fight, we'll fight. I'm not scared of blood. I've seen my share of it when I was a Marine." Jacob's voice rang with tension. After these words, the inmates looked at Jacob differently and listened to his story with their utmost attention. The name of the inmate who stood up for Jacob was Harry Thompson. He spent half of his life behind bars, but had a reputation of a wise and just man who was respected for that by the other inmates. Thompson quickly realized that Jacob was wrongfully accused and was in no hurry to mete out his judgment or punishment. Having spent many years behind bars, Harry Thompson learned to distinguish between real hardened criminals and those who made an unfortunate mistake. That's exactly why Thompson ordered his thugs to leave Jacob alone. Thompson couldn't have known at the time that shortly after that, Jacob would save his life in an attack organized by a rival gang. "Thank you, Jacob. That was very manly of you. I'm glad I wasn't wrong about you," said Thompson. Thompson wanted to help Jacob, who wasn't a criminal, and using his connections on the outside, he hired a good lawyer for Jacob. As soon as the professional lawyer took over the case, Jacob's release became only a question of time. Moreover, the lawyer managed to dig up a mountain of dirt on the Ramirez family. This information completely turned the tables. Now that Mr. Ramirez was incarcerated, it was clear that Jacob was set up and wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit. The investigation also involved Alfred Ramirez, who, just like his father, bogged down in illegal activities. Before leaving the prison, Jacob warmly thanked Harry Thompson for all his help. "What are you talking about? Don't even mention it. You saved my life, and I owe you for it. Remember, not every person behind bars is evil, just as not every person on the outside is good," said Mr. Thompson as he shook Jacob's hand. Once he was free, Jacob sought out his ex-fiancée and apologized to her. Only now did he realize what she had to go through, being assaulted by the farmer's son. "Please forgive me. I didn't know what happened," said Jacob as he hugged his crying ex-fiancée. But Maggie wasn't angry at Jacob, as she knew that she should have told him the truth as soon as he returned home. Once they were done with this unpleasant conversation, Jacob and Maggie decided to move in together and start their relationship from a clean slate. Jacob's mom was the happiest about this news and was hoping that she would finally get to see her grandchildren, whom she'd been dreaming of for so long. Finally, it's worth mentioning that the Ramirez family lost all of its influence and wealth. Ramirez's father and Ramirez's son are serving their time in neighboring cells of the state county prison, and it will be a while before they get out.